Hi, I'm Naisha McCauley, and you're watching AccessTV.org.
Good morning, this is Jonathan Small, host and producer of All About You. This program is broadcast every single week at AccessTV.org studios in downtown Hartford. And this program is designed to give the guests a chance to give their life story. This morning, I have the president and CEO of a nonprofit organization that has a connection on a national level as well as many local areas. This morning, I have the president and CEO of the Greater Hartford Urban League, Miss Adrienne Cochrane. Good morning, Ms. Cochrane.
Good morning. Good morning.
All right. You got to let people know briefly a little bit about your life, where you was born and raised.
Oh, well, that would take up your entire program. I was actually born in Boston. Well, my dad was at Harvard. Mm-hmm. I've moved about the country and even outside of the country quite a bit. And actually, I'd like to talk a little bit about my Urban League life, if that's good. This is my 10th year in the Urban League movement. Mm-hmm. I started in the western suburbs of Chicago, a city called Aurora, with the Urban League. I was there a little over 3 years. I moved from there to the Urban League of Broward County, that's Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where I spent about the same amount of time, a little over 3 years. And then the opportunity presented, which was always on my goal list. If I was going to be in the Urban League movement, then I certainly had determined I wanted to go to the top of the totem pole. And the top of the totem pole is to be a CEO of an Urban League affiliate. And I was selected in September of 2010, or actually began here in September of 2010 as the Urban League CEO of the Urban League of Greater Hartford. So that sort of rounds out a little over 10 years of my Urban League life.
Okay. Now, technically, I mean, for people out there who are not aware what the National Urban League is, what type of organization is they designed to advocate? I mean, what is the Urban League?
Okay.
What is their whole purpose, basically?
Right. Well, there is a national office that's currently located on Wall Street, but that in the next 3 years or so will be relocated to Harlem. So we're excited about that, the national headquarters.
Oh, okay.
But it actually, National Urban League began in 1910. And years prior to that, there was Jim Crow South.
Right.
And so you had many blacks fleeing Jim Crow South, coming north, many ending up in New York City. And so at that time, you had a free, educated black man, and you had the widow of a railroad shipping magnate. And they were kind of like, what are we going to do about the Negro condition? We have all of these people coming here, and what is it that they need? They need housing. They need education, and they need jobs. And that began as a series of committees addressing those three areas and evolved into the National Urban League, which is really sort of the epicenter of all that we do. It's the headquarters. There are 95 affiliates in 36 states and the District of Columbia. Little trivia. Ohio and Florida have the largest number of Urban League affiliates with 7 each. Connecticut has 2, Greater Hartford, and then the second one down in Stamford. There was an Urban League affiliate in New Haven, but that closed some years ago.
Ms. Cochrane, what kind of determines the fact that a state needs or has an Urban League affiliate office? I mean, what is the whole role beyond why one state would have more than other states of an Urban League?
I think it's the density of population more than anything. If you look at the size of Florida, or if you look at Ohio, and I also think it's the communities. So clearly, you have urban leagues that function in urban pockets and in urban communities. So you may have a city or a state that does not have a majority minority population, but you may have certain pockets there. And so I think the concern always goes to the interests of particularly African Americans, because that's the baseline of why urban leagues were founded to. And now it's sort of expanded to say minorities. And when we talk about disenfranchised and underrepresented populations, you're talking about Black and brown people, really. And so I think it's really budget-wise, what's affordable in a community. There's a certain dollar amount. I couldn't quote you any specific figures. That comes from the national office. But to establish an office, there are just certain things that you're going to have in place. You're going to have an independent board of directors to govern. You're going to have funding to actually run programs, because urban leagues are community organizations. And I think that gets kind of misunderstood sometimes, as if an urban league is like a one-stop. It's not a one-stop. It's a community collaborative organization with the intent of we provide the services we provide, and then we hand off to other community partners that can provide services that we don't actually provide.
Now, you mentioned that the National Urban League has been established since 1910.
Yes.
And I know in Greater Hartford, this chapter has been here since 1964,
Yes.
so 50 years, a 50-year
Yes.
anniversary.
Yes, hallelujah. Right?
Hallelujah that you do that. But didn't a lot of this have to do with establishing a chapter here in Hartford coming out of the War on Poverty with Lyndon B. Johnson? Did that have something to do with us having one established here?
It's certainly related. If we look back in history, we know that much of the work moving toward the civil rights movement, because this is also, as you know, the 50th anniversary of the signing of arguably one of the most important pieces of legislation in this country's history. And so in the 63 time, when you actually had President Kennedy, who began all of the groundwork for what would become the civil rights bill that was actually signed by Lyndon Johnson after Kennedy's assassination, and then Johnson's War on Poverty. But you also had, the 60s were a turbulent period. It was a volatile period. There was a lot of unrest throughout the entire nation. Many people think it was just a Southern issue. I've done interviews where the conversation focused on, was there really that much going on in the East? Was there really that much going on in the North? And the question is absolutely. This was America's shame, the way that Black people were being treated, the rights and benefits that just did not extend to us. It just didn't exist. We saw television depictions of murders and hosings and beatings, and that's what we saw in the South, which sort of gave us this sense that we weren't having we weren't having the same types of things occurring, but we had civil unrest, and civil unrest leads to civil disobedience. So in Hartford, you began to have the rioting in the streets. You began to have the general dissatisfaction with what was the condition for Black people at that time. The Urban League is also a civil rights agency, and many times people, they don't think of the Urban League in that way, and there's a debate about which came first, but you've got two very important civil rights organizations, really, that were up and coming at that time. You have the NAACP and you have the Urban League of the National Urban League, and then the various Urban League affiliates throughout the country. And so I do think that as they were founded at different times, it really related to what was going on in the community at that time. Even if you have an Urban League affiliate that was founded when there was no particular civil unrest or disobedience there, it's just the idea of an agency that would advocate for the needs of the Black and brown communities.
Okay, Adrienne, you just said the word advocate. Is there a difference now between advocating something and solving a particular issue? Because you can always advocate for something, but the issues are still remaining here.
Right.
Would it be fair to say that the Urban League is not designed to solve problems? I'm talking serious problems like real poverty, real criminal justice issues, real disparities, homicides. I mean, is the Urban League an organization that's designed to solve these problems or just advocate and try to address the problems?
Well, I don't think there's any single entity that can solve any of those problems. I think it's the combination of organizations and various entities working together. Is the Urban League one that works towards solving some of those issues you talked about? Absolutely. Because at the root of a lot of this are, just as in 1910, what do people need? They need a roof over their head, whether they rent it or own it. They need a job to pay for the roof over their head, their kids, etc. They need education or training to get to that. So the baseline for the Urban League of Greater Hartford as a direct services agency remains the same as what our founding mothers and fathers foresaw. How do we help people get that? We know that whatever the unemployment rate is in the country, that it disproportionately affects, and that number is double when you start talking about Black people. We know that. We know that there are those that aren't even counted. If you've never worked, you've never been out there in a search, or you're not underemployed, you're unemployed, and you're not counted. So we have the statistics and the numbers for those that are counted. Let's think about all of those that aren't counted. You have communities in despair. You have people who lost their homes during the recession. You have people who lost jobs for various reasons. You have people that don't make enough money to live decently. So there are a number of issues that the Urban League addresses. We are addressing it from an advocacy perspective in the sense of our connections to, the various other services that are in the Greater Hartford community. We certainly have relationships with the police department. We have relationships in the mayor's office. We have relationships in the governor's office. We even have relationships with our representatives on both sides of the aisle. So you have an organization that's pretty complete in terms of what our connections are. Little known fact, the National Urban League has a legal office. Actually, this is the policy-making office that's actually located in Washington, D.C. It's staffed with some attorneys and some are staff people, but they're all focused on policy issues. So they've always got their ear to the ground. They're in Congress all the time. They're in the White House. They know what issues, are facing Black and brown people, in this country. And they're keeping us informed on a national level so that we're able to address those issues with our representatives on a local area. Our national president, Mark Morial, you may be familiar, is a former mayor of New Orleans. So as a politician, he has a deep understanding of how political processes work. He certainly gets his fair share of interviews and opportunities to be on CNN, MSNBC, various stations to talk about the issues that face our communities. And actually, I'm just back from our national conference. The Urban League has its national conference in a city that has an Urban League affiliate every year. Cincinnati, this was the year. And so we're absolutely talking about not only what our community platforms are around, as I said, education, employment, housing. But we're talking about nationally, what are the issues that are affecting our people and what are the issues that are facing people who are similarly situated. So we're a non-political organization, but we are an advocacy organization, which means we have the conversations and we rely on, again, our various political representatives locally and nationally. We make it very clear to them what our positions are on any number of things.
Okay, so the Urban League basically has all of the data of the statistics of the issues that exist that affects the African American community, the urban community. You have the political representation on a political level down in Washington, D.C. You have attorneys, as you mentioned, that have a legal office, I believe.
Well, that is the policy office, and so it is actually headed up by a Howard University graduate. She is an attorney that used to work in Congress.
Okay. Yeah. So what I'm saying is, if we're attacking a war on poverty, would it be fair to say that the Urban League has all of the resources it needs to attack poverty, or is there some things that the Urban League could still be willing to have additional to what you already have?
Sure. You never have enough resources. There's never enough money. There are never enough people. That's why it takes the all of us.
Okay.
You know, that's why I said earlier, it really can't be a conversation about any one entity, Urban League or any other, that's going to ride in and attack all of these issues single-handedly. It has to be a collaborative, coordinated process because none of us have enough to do all of it. So what we do, as we said at 140 Woodland, we serve Greater Hartford. Now, what that means for us in real time is that anybody in the Connecticut Capital Region, anybody can come to the Urban League and get services. Who's at the Urban League primarily? We're going to be sitting on that north end. We're going to get mostly Hartford residents coming in with their particular issues. But we're open to everybody. But we also know that while we serve in youth development, while we serve in housing, that is both first-time home buyer, as well as trying to help those that may be on the brink of foreclosure, while we serve with workforce development and training, both trying to help the unemployed and underemployed get either better employment or get employed. And while we work with certain health disparities and other issues, working in consonance with St. Francis Hospital, for example, is one of our partners. And they lease the first floor of our building. That's the home of the Curtis D. Robinson Men's Health Institute and the Center for Health Equity. So you can see there's a connectivity there in terms of, we're talking about the Black community, we're talking about the brown community. Once again, almost everything disproportionately affects us. And so we're trying to attack this from a number of angles with the understanding that just our expertise isn't in health equity, but we have a partner whose expertise is there.
Yes.
So that's what I talk about in terms of being a community agency and in terms of positioning ourselves so that we are collaborating and we are working with everyone, because it's really all about how we serve this community, how we impact this community. Urban League doesn't belong to me, our board, Mark Morial, the national office. Urban League belongs to the community. And the only thing that will keep us viable and will keep us relevant is for us to assure that we are serving and meeting the needs of the community today.
Okay. Let's take a quick break and let's come back with part 2 of this conversation, because I'm really enjoying what I'm hearing this morning about the Urban League.
Thank you.
And hopefully the people out there can also get some understanding too.
Thank you.
This is Jonathan Small. I'm hosting All About You this morning with the president and CEO of the Greater Hartford Urban League, Miss Adrienne Cochrane, and we will be right back very shortly. Thank you.
I'm very happy to be here tonight to congratulate and support AccessTV.org. AccessTV.org has reached hundreds and thousands of people. It's done a great job informing the community about important issues in our city, our state, and our nation. I congratulate Stan McCauley and Naisha for the job they've done. And now with their new format, which will reach many more people and which will be available through many more formats, the future is very bright for AccessTV.org. Congratulations, and may you continue your mission of informing our community. Thank you very much.
Good morning again. This is Jonathan Small hosting All About You this morning with my guest, the president and CEO of the Greater Hartford Urban League, Miss Adrienne Cochrane. We're going to get back into our part 2 of our conversation, and you left off indicating about the community's role, or it's a community-based organization. And let me just say up front that in politics or in family, it should be a two-way street. Like yes. President Kennedy said, not ask what you expect your country to do for you, but what you're willing to do for your country.
Yes.
And I kind of get the feeling that there's some issues of working with the community basically here locally and probably on a national level. What is some of the issues that mostly concerned you about the community's role or involvement with the Greater Hartford Urban League?
Well, first of all, I like that you quoted that, and I'd probably modify it to say, ask what your urban league can do for you,
Okay.
but also ask what you can do for your urban league. So as I said, it's a community organization. It belongs to the community. Our services are free. We're not charging anybody anything that walks through our doors. But everything runs on funding. So clearly, sometimes the more volume that you have in certain areas or certain programs, sometimes that bodes well for you with a potential funder. But sometimes we need the simple support of the community. Now, one way that can be done, the Urban League for years has had this idea of membership. And this was nationally. So you could have an individual membership, you could have a family membership, you could have a corporate membership. And so over the years from the national office from which we get our guidance, it was sort of like, well, in many ways, it's sort of being misinterpreted what membership really means. It doesn't mean that the public comes to an annual meeting, you're invited, but it doesn't mean there's a vote. Or it doesn't mean you come in and you have a particular say about who's hired to be the director of a program or who's hired to be the CEO. But what it does mean is that you can have a voice or involvement in terms of what types of services, what types of programs the Urban League offers, and how we are able to improve in those services. Because the fact of the matter is, we might think we're doing an excellent job. Hey, we've got great staff, we have committed staff, many people are there 9 to 9, our door says 9 to 5, but you'll find Urban Leaguers in that building providing services long after 5 p.m. and many weekends. But community feedback is very important. So we got away from the idea of membership because it's confusing to mission support. On our 50th anniversary, one of the things we'd like to see is 500 mission supporters for the Urban League. And that doesn't translate to any specific dollar amount. We get checks for $5 and we get checks for higher. And you know what? Everything that comes into the Urban League turns back to programs, and everything that comes to the Urban League we are extremely appreciative of. So there really is no amount that is too small, because no amount of funding for programs and contracts alone is going to sustain the programs or going to sustain the Urban League. And that's what we're interested in, the sustainability of a viable organization that is making significant positive impact in the community. Otherwise, there is no other reason for the Urban League to exist. So the role of my staff is to make sure that they are delivering quality first-class programs. And if we're not, we need to know that. And we need to understand what the problem is so that we can fix it. Because I leverage that to go out into the community to various funders and to ask for the support for our programs to the extent that they're able to fund them. There are many other wonderful organizations in this community. And the sad fact of the matter is most of us are competing for the same dollars. Now, some of us are not competing for the same dollars because some funding is absolutely mission driven. And so if it's not something that the Urban League offers, it's not a program that we have, then clearly we don't expect funding, for example, in the area of substance abuse. We don't provide those services. But where we do provide those services, then we should be relied upon to make the appropriate referral to those agencies that do provide those services. And that's how we get more of a community holistic approach with an individual or a family. You may come in and present, oh, I need a GED. But we're going to give you an intake that's going to assess, what are your other needs? Do you have sufficient housing? Are your children, do they have enough food? Are there mental health, substance abuse, homeless issues? There are so many barriers that our average individual or family presents with. We don't want to just touch one area, because you touch one area and you still have all of these other problems here. You're still not going to be able to perform. You can't concentrate on being in a GED class and getting your GED if you're worried about where your next meal is going to come from or you don't have a home. So the community, really, we want you to come to the Urban League. We want you to utilize our services, and we want you to tell us very honestly what your experience is once you leave.
Well, I mean, you mentioned the word several times about funding,
Yes.
and funding is a critical role for any nonprofit organization.
Absolutely.
There's no doubt about that.
Right.
But there's been a lot of criticisms I've heard of people saying that the Urban League should be revamped, it should be eliminated, it has served its course in time, and it's no longer really effective. And it's not just the Urban League, it's
Sure,
the
I understand.
NACP, other organizations too. But I think the bottom line, when you kept mentioning the word funding, I spoke to somebody and I asked the person, did anybody from the National Urban League attended or was involved with the Million Man March that Louis Farrakhan had established in 1995? And somebody told me basically that if the Urban League was involved with that particular march, it would lose some of its funding. Now, I don't know if that's true or not.
I have no idea.
You don't have no idea. I don't want to put
idea.
you
Yeah.
as you have to
Absolutely
define
no
whether
idea.
that's the case or not.
Yeah.
But there is certain things politically that the Urban League can and can't do because of the funding. I mean, there's certain issues that you can't take a dramatic stance against because of the funding.
It's really
funding.
not tied to funding, it's tied to purpose.
Okay.
All right, so we can't support any political candidate for any reason.
Okay.
We're not a political organization. That's not what we do.
Okay.
We are now, as individuals, whatever our particular politics or party affiliation, that's as an individual. But as an organization, I cannot, as president and CEO, go out and stomp the turf, for anyone in particular. And frankly, I think that's as it should be, because if you think about it, all that's going to do is promote divisiveness. If we take a stand that we're for X candidate and we rally behind X candidate and X candidate loses an election, or once X candidate is out of office, where does that leave us?
Right.
So neutrality is what is important for us as an organization. That's the first thing. In terms of whether or not, I can guarantee you this, for the Million Man March, whether the Urban League proper, because remember, there are 95 affiliates throughout the country in 36 states.
Right.
So people come together for any number of things. We came together from all over the country for the March on Washington last year again. So I'd be very surprised if there was no Urban Leaguer in that mix. I can't comment on there would be a loss of funding. I have no idea what that reference is. In terms of the organization being relevant and running its course, I suppose the question I would pose to someone is, if not the Urban League, then who? No one has ever been able to articulate to me an alternative. If you're saying, well, the Urban League should go away, it's kind of run its course. What's our course? Are people still needing jobs? Are
Yes.
people still homeless? Are people still hungry? Are kids still struggling in our education system? Are kids black kids still disproportionately not only not entering, but not graduating? Are black boys still being disproportionately suspended and expelled from schools? Are our kids still out on the street killing each other? There's any list of things. So my question is, if the Urban League in a community is not helping to address those issues, then my question would be, who is? Anytime an organization, we're talking about Urban League, in the 4 years that I've been in Hartford, there are a couple of organizations, community organizations, whose doors have closed.
Right.
That's a need for whoever those agencies were serving that goes unfilled. We'll make an assumption. Well, they'll just go to the Urban League or they'll go to another organization. Maybe not. Sometimes you absolutely lose people because they're so invested in a particular organization that organization no longer there. Now they're just lost. That's why I make the point that we're a community organization. I would argue that the needs of urban leagues, not just the Urban League of Greater Hartford, but throughout this country, I would say the need is greater than ever. We served over 2.5 million people last year alone. 2.5 million. That's up a couple of 100,000 from the year prior. So what I would submit to you is this. There are 2.5 million people in this country that are probably better off for some of the services they received through an Urban League affiliate. We're a smaller affiliate, so we're serving somewhere between 2,500 and 3,000. That's 2,500 2,500 to 3,000 individuals and families whose lives, I can almost guarantee you, are better off for services that they received at the Urban League. We cannot single-handedly make anybody self-sufficient. What we do is help prepare people to get on the path. We do our part because, again, we don't provide all the services, nor can we, nor should we. But in terms of being relevant, I think we're absolutely a relevant organization. And I think that anyone that would have any doubt might go to the New Haven community, because when they really missed the Urban League and really understood what the Urban League was in their community, it was gone. And that's what happens in most instances. An organization is gone, and then people say, wow. We have people that walk through our doors at tax time without any advertising because they know for years the Urban League has offered free tax services. They just come.
Yes.
They just come, get their appointments, and then come back when they're told to come back. So we've been a community staple for 50 years. We intend to continue to be a community staple, and we intend to continue to improve the services that we provide so that we always are having an important impact on our citizens. Now, if we cease to do that, then no, we shouldn't exist. But I would absolutely argue that without fear of contradiction, Mr. Smalls, that we are probably more relevant than ever.
Well, let me just say one thing. The Urban League has been here in the Greater Hartford area for 50 years.
Yes.
So that speaks volumes that you have been able to exist when many other organizations hasn't.
Yes.
You mentioned the word that if it wasn't for the Urban League, what else? I mean, you can make the statement about other organizations, not just the Urban League, too. I mean, I hear the criticism of the NACP that they should be eliminated, or, they've all run their course. But I think at some point, it gets to a disturbing reality that the community shouldn't be in a dependent poverty structure for 50 to 100 years.
Right.
African Americans have, if you take a look at their disposable income, probably the disposable income of maybe the 9th richest country throughout the world. So there really should be no reason why we're having these poverty-stricken inner cities all over our country, but for some reason it exists.
Right.
And I think the fact that if the Urban League wasn't available, the conditions would clearly be a lot worse. Now, is there a design systematically, structurally, to keep a percentage of African Americans? Because we haven't even mentioned the black middle class that's doing extremely well. I mean, I don't think they need these particular services.
Right.
But I think there's a very disturbing reality that for this length of time, you continue to have the same poverty-stricken, high unemployment, underemployment, limited resources, economic development in these inner cities, particularly where the Urban League has been established. I'm going to throw one solution to you, in my opinion, and this is only going to speak for me. I'm not speaking for AccessTV.org network.
Understood.
I think Dr. Claude Anderson is one person that I highly admire. And I think his Powernomic plans is one of the best plans that exist in this country. He has a seafood factory in Maryland that's really thriving. And I think he's mentioned so many times that the economic disparities, the fact that many black people throughout urban America don't own and control and have a direct stake in their community is one of the reasons why you're having this type of poverty. If somebody like that was to say, I have a plan that I'm willing to help the Urban League do things differently, would that type of person or that type of plan be something that the Urban League or yourself as president could be able to interact, work with?
Well, so let me say this to you. We have conversations all the time with everybody, and we're always interested locally, regionally, nationally in solutions. But I do want to say this as well. A lot of what you're talking about has to do with access. What you've just described certainly depicts a general black condition. We're serving primarily, you're right, low, very, very low to moderate income. I would say to you that surprisingly, maybe, we do serve people, some in the slightly higher echelon, and I'll tell you why. Because in terms of housing, in terms of an opportunity to buy a home, you'd be very surprised that there are many fairly prominent people in this community that got their first home through the Urban League because they come in and do the first-time home buyer. Now, For blacks, what's the single greatest indicator of a route to self-sufficiency, to building wealth? It's owning a home.
Right.
It doesn't have to be a home that sits in some, highfalutin, if you will, neighborhood and has lots of zeros, but owning a home and being able to pass that asset generationally. Now, if we look at the statistics for those of us that do, we don't. Let's also just really be realistic about something else. A lot of what we're trying to do in the Urban League, when I talk about financial education and financial literacy, are a mainstay of the programs. All of the programs we do, they're age, stage appropriate, because we have to teach our folk how to save. We have to teach our folk that it's great that you're walking around with some label for somebody that has millions and millions of dollars, and you own that, but you don't have any money in the bank, or you're not able to pay your rent, or you're not able to pay your utilities, or you're not able to pay for some of the basic needs for your children. Some of this is education.
This is Jonathan Small. I'm going to make a closing comment. I rarely do this, but I will do it this morning. It's very important that people in the community also look within themselves and not always point the finger at a particular organization or a particular person, because as my guest mentioned this morning, the Urban League cannot solve all of the social economic problems that exist in the Greater Hartford area, or can the National Urban League be in a position to solve all of the problems on a national level. We all have to do our part. And I think what accesstv.org has been trying to do over the past 2 years is provide a community voice with proper content and information, and bring in real interesting guests on this particular network to do our part. So as I say every single week, there's a lot of good programs that you could always look at on accesstv.org network. And I also say to people out there, have a very blessed day and keep the faith. Thank you.